Hello everyone. This is day 1 of the Game Design U-CRAFT course provided by sleepinthemorning.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create some levels and projects much like the one you see here. This is the U-CRAFT project provided by sleepinthemorning.com. So there's a couple of examples and samples available for you. There are also tutorials available under the Help category and Tutorials. So let's get started. When you open the engine, this is what it looks like. On the top File menu, I'm going to click File and New Level. I'm also going to choose Default so we can get the sky, player start, and some other environmental factors. So don't be overwhelmed by all the different tabs and panels and options that you see here. We're going to go through each one of them. So starting with the top, you see the most common buttons that are used throughout the engine. One of them is the play button. And next to it, there's additional options for how you play. But let's leave it with the selected viewport. When you click play, the game will start running, but you can't control the player until you click within the window here to give it focus. From there, you can adjust and start moving the player and actually playing the game. You can press escape to stop playing. Another important button is the save current one. So if I click on that, I can save the level as needed. And I'm going to call it my first map. Okay, so let's talk about these viewports here. The first one we notice is the world viewport, the level viewport. This is how we see the world that we're building. To move the camera around, I need to click within the world and drag the mouse around. I need to click and hold here, so when I left click and hold, I can drive around. If I right click and hold, I can look around with the mouse. While any of these buttons are pressed, I can use the WASD keys to also traverse around. So if I hold right click, I can start moving forward and backwards with W and S, and A and D to move side to side. Q and E are also available to traverse up and down. And these are important because you want to see different angles of your level to ensure that everything is where you think it is. For example, if I have a cube somewhere over here, it looks like it's here on top, but it could be anywhere else here. So you want to make sure you look at it from all sides to ensure that that is where it needs to be. That being said, the left side of the screen is the place modes. This is by default where we are at, and we're under the basic category to bring in basic objects. These are primitives provided by the engine, like cubes and spheres, and more. When I select an object in my level, notice the tool available here to move it around. I can move it around any degree of motion that I choose. So what are the other options we have? If I press the space bar here, we can change the option of how we move this object. So the arrows indicate movement to translate. The circles indicate rotation, so I can rotate the object and change the orientation however I choose. And the boxes are the scale tool, where I can stretch or shrink the item. These hotkeys are also available here. Translate, rotate, and scale, so I can click on these to change them as well. If you need more information, with the mouse cursor held above these actions, you can hold Ctrl and Alt for more information. You can also see a link to the documentation here if you need to read more about it. When you change any of these options and properties for your objects, it's actually changing the details. So what does that mean? When I select any object in the world, I can look at the right side of my screen for the Details category here. The Details panel is there by default, but if for some reason you moved it or closed it, make sure you find it. At the very top options, there is a Window option, and you can recover any of the panels that you need. So we need the Details 1. This is because I just closed it. So it's here, and I can change the properties here manually if I choose to. So if I change the Z option, you can see the Z option being changed in the details as well. So I can actually change that value manually if I choose to by going here and typing in a hard number. like 0. 0, 0, 0 is the center of the world. Think of graph paper when you have a graph paper with 0 in the x, 0 in the y. Because this is 3D in fact. When you make any changes to these properties, you'll see on the right side an option to reset to default. This brings it back to the original setting that it was in the first place. So if I click on those, the floor will be re-put back to normal. When I make any changes, I can play the game and see them in action. These objects are just floating here. Why is that? I'm going to press escape to stop playing. With any of our objects selected, we can see the details for more options here. If I scroll down, I can change the static mesh property, so I can change the shape of the geometry that is applied. So even though this object is called cube, it's looking like a cone. I can also change the material to change it to a different color. If I keep scrolling down, I can find physics categories to change the physics properties of this object. If I simulate physics, this will now be using the physics engine to apply forces and gravity. By default, gravity is enabled, so if I hit play, the object will fall down. I can also kick it around and move it with forces, because my player is pushing against it and applying a force. I'm going to press escape to stop playing. When I select any of the objects, you can see them also selected in the top right corner, which is the World Outliner. The World Outliner tab is going to give you a list of all the objects you have in your level, so you can also select them from here if you like to. So my cube is actually a cone, so I can click on that and rename it. I'll call it cone. It's a good idea to name your objects because the more you bring into the world, they'll just be called these weird names. The player start icon is in the middle of the screen here, and this is where the player will spawn in the world. Because there is no player here in the level until we press play. When I press play, the engine will spawn a player at this position. It's also going to face the direction that's applied here. So if you want it looking at a different direction, you have to spin and orient the direction of this forward. And again, you can see in action when you play. So on the left side of the screen, we've been in the place modes by default, which allows us to place these primitives into the level. There's also a category for geometry. Let's check that out. If I drag in a box, for example, I can put it over here, and this is going to use a brush, and we can see the details here applying as brush settings. By default, they're additive, and I'll show you subtractive in a second. But with this object selected, we can go to the left side of the screen and change our modes to geometry editing. This will allow us to edit the geometry and change it up a little bit. So if I click on one of the sides, I can move it to stretch it. If I click on any of the points, I can move those as well. If I click on an edge, I can also move that as well. So we can actually create some really weird shapes or custom shapes. If I select any of the faces, there's also an extrude property, because by default we've been in editing to edit it, but if you extrude, this will actually pull out some of the walls. It says we have to be in local coordinate system, so up here you can change that. It brought us into the local coordinate system from the world, and from there I can start pulling out the walls to make them longer. If I go back to edit mode, then I can start editing these walls and make some different kind of shapes. And again, these could be used in the game, so as soon as I hit play, you can see them in action. So let's talk about the subtraction portion. Let's go back to the place modes here. Because remember, if you're in any of these other modes besides the place modes, when you click on objects, you're not going to have the same properties as normal. So make sure you go back to the place modes when you're finished. So back in the geometry category, I'm going to drag in a sphere, just for an example. And I'm going to put it right on top of the other shape of geometry that we have here. And instead of using the additive property, by selecting and checking the details out, the brush settings have it as additive, and I can change it to subtractive. Subtractive means it will actually cut geometry instead of adding geometry. So we can see that the previous shape is cut based on where the sphere is. So we can create even more funkier looking shapes. When you make changes to your level and you're comfortable, make sure to remember to save. Because I have seen the engine crash pretty often. So the last part let's talk about is landscaping. The landscaping category allows us to put a landscape into our world, or otherwise known as a terrain. When you click on it, you'll get a giant grid around your level, and you can change the size accordingly to the details here on the left side of your screen. I'm going to leave them as is, but I'm just going to scroll down and hit the create button. This will actually create and form the terrain, and by default it uses the sculpt tool here. So let's see what that looks like. If I click in the surface of my geometry, I can start pulling up mountains or hills. If I hold shift and click in the ground, I will bring the mountains down. You definitely need to practice with this to form your own levels. And you can change the details of your brush here on the left side of your screen if you want it to be stronger, smaller, or bigger, and stuff like that. There's also other tools to adjust here. By default, sculpt is selected, but we can change other ones too. For example, the flatten tool. I like to use the flatten tool on mountains here, so you can see that when I click on a part of the mountain, it'll actually flatten the ground to that spot. So it flattens it. I can press Ctrl Z to undo if I don't like what I just changed. So I'm going to lower the brush size. And I'm going to click a little bit here on the mountains. Instead of holding, I'm going to click and drag just very shortly to bring some other aspects here on the mountain. And then I can flatten out the bottom if I like. I can flatten out the top as well. And maybe I could form some kind of road here on the mountain as well. This is again using the flatten tool after sculpting. And there's many other tools to choose from. I guess like the ramping tool. The ramping tool allows us to put 2 points in the world, change the points around, and when I'm ready I can use enter or add ramp, and it will add a ramp. So if I have a racing game, I can use this to use a ramp for a high jump. So you have to play with these tools a little bit to figure out exactly what they do. Once I put these hills and valleys here and I finish, remember to go back to the place modes. From there you can start adding more things into your level. For example, let's add a plane here into this dip, and I'm going to scale it up really large as I can, and we can see that it forms a water shape because of the hills and valleys that we created with the terrain. So this could be a pretty cool lake. If I click on the item on the plane, I can change the details, and maybe I could find a water detail. Default water material. That doesn't look like water. I guess if you have the starter content, you can see more materials. So if you have the U-CRAFT project downloaded from sleepinthemorning.com, you can read more about this in the tutorials. Under Help, Tutorials, you can find the Art section, which is Chapter 4, to learn more about the terrain, geometry brushes, and more. To download more materials, you need to go to the Marketplace, and there's a button up here for that. You can click on the Marketplace button to open up the Marketplace and find assets from that area. There's tons of assets, even free ones, so I urge you to find those and play with them. Alright, let's talk about one more thing really quick. When you close and open up the engine, it's not going to open this level, so you need to make sure you go to the Content folder and open up your map there by double-clicking on it. So this project was created without using starter content. But let me show you one more thing with starter content. In the content browser down here, you can use the Add New button and select Add Feature or Content Pack. From there, you can use the built-in starter packages that are available to you. But I'm specifically looking for content packs, so I'm going to click there and use starter content. Then I can use the Add to Project button to import them. I know I pressed the button, so I'm going to be patient. When the import completes, you can close this window. Now in my content folder, when I click on the content, I can see a starter content folder. And from there, I can see all the available assets that were provided by the starter content. For example, the props folder. This has a couple of items we can use in our levels, like a rock. So I can put some rocks into my world, and I can duplicate them. But when you put them next to each other like this, it looks a little cheesy, doesn't it? I want to be able to distort these a little bit and modify them somehow so that they can appear a little bit differently. If I move them around and scale them, I can make it appear like a different rock. See that? With the same asset, I made it look like two different things. That being said, really exaggerate some of your things here, because it might make them look better. Objects that are far away can be really big. And again, we can distort them by modifying their positions and orientations and scale. Even so, you can combine multiples right on top of each other if you like. Be creative with this because you don't know how much things you can find. And don't put too many in your scene, just enough to drive your point. If some of them are penetrating the ground, that's okay, because all you care is about what the player sees on the top. Same goes with trees and bushes. I can put a couple of small bushes here and there, but I can also put really large ones if I wanted to. With more distortions, copies, and orientations, we can make it look like a forest. So as you can see, with more details and more of these distortions, you'll get closer and closer to your final level. But let's talk about something else. In the next video, we're going to talk more about blueprints. But why don't we see what a preview of that looks like? If I drag on a cube here, I want to be able to have the player jump on the cube and grab an item. So that means this object has to have some kind of logic behind it, or code, to demonstrate that ability and that feature. Every level comes with a blueprint. At the very top toolbar, we have the Blueprints category, and we can drop down to Open Level Blueprint. This is what a blueprint looks like. So if you need more information about blueprints, again, go to the Help category, Tutorials, and Chapter 1, Science, will go through the blueprints for you. If you're up for a challenge, the Technology chapter also has more about blueprints and a challenge. The challenge is to create a dialogue system so you can have narrative in your game. But let's go back to our blueprint to demonstrate this example. We're going to be going over this deeper in the next videos, but I just wanted to show you a preview. In my level, if I have the cube selected, I can go to the level blueprint, I can make some room with the right mouse button, and I can right-click to add actions or functions to this blueprint. This is all context sensitive, so in the level blueprint, if I have the cube selected, I can actually add events for that cube. For example, collision. And I can use hit. When something hits this cube, I want to see if it's the player hitting it or something else. This function gets activated and passes a couple of parameters here. So we can check those parameters, like the other actor. Is the other actor a player? But we can't just ask that as a question. I can't just say are you a player? Because that doesn't exist. We need to use functionality to check that. So if I drag from the other actor, I can find a function called actor_has_tag. And I can check for a specific tag, like player. So I want to know if the object that's hit is tagged as a player. This return value is a boolean, which is true or false. And to check those variables in the blueprints, we use what's called a branch. So I'm going to right click and look for branch and tie in the connections. So the condition should come from the tag check and the execution logic should come from the hit cube. So to reiterate, when something hits the cube, I want to check if it's the right actor using this if check, and if it's true, the player has hit it, and I can, for example, I can spawn other actors like coins or mushrooms or anything like that. I don't have any right now in my project. I can also use place sounds at location, place sound at location, and I can place sounds as well. I can also break the box. So if I right click, I can also find the reference to the cube because I have it selected in the level. This is the same as going into the level and dragging the cube from the scene to your blueprint. So if I drag from the cube, I can also call functions from that, like destroy actor. Okay, simple enough. When something hits the cube, the first thing I want to do is check if they have the tag as the player, because I don't want other objects to break the blocks, and it will break the block after. The top viewport has the compile button. Whenever you change a blueprint, you need to compile it. Compiling checks if there's any errors that need to be fixed before playing. You can't play a game that has errors. So this compile checked out, and I'll also save. Back in my level, before I play the game, I want to make sure that the player has the tag. If I use the hotkey Control P, this will open an asset by name, and I can search character. I want to open up the third-person character, because we're in a third-person game, and this is the blueprint for the character. This was provided by default, so it already has the movement logic, and looking logic, and jumping logic. So you can check that out if you like. And so at the top toolbar is the class default section. If I click on that, I can see the details for all the available defaults that are here. And one of them is called tag. The actor tags are within the class defaults, and I can add more here if necessary. But it looks like they have the player tag already, so I'll keep that as is. I'll close any files I'm not working in anymore, and I can press play. When I go up to the cube, I can break it open. We'll learn more about this in the next videos. This was just a preview. See you next time.